Welcome back to Unit 6. In this part of Unit 6, we're going to be talking about value. We've just finished up talking about painting, and of course, we started this unit talking about the Baroque. And the Baroque is a great part of art history where we can really start discussing value and value contrast very clearly. And partially because in the Renaissance, we have the establishment of this search for chiaroscuro and thinking about um, modeling value as a way of making forms seem really real. And then that pushes into the Baroque, where we have this kind of extreme form of chiaroscuro, which is known as tenebrism. So in this lecture, we're going to be covering a couple of things. One, some of the different ways that artists can create value and value contrast in a painting or in an image. Two, we're going to talk about some of the main components in value contrast. What does it mean when we say this image has more contrast than another, and in what ways? And we'll talk about light and the creating of emphasis, as well as value grouping. Okay, so like I said, we've been looking at Baroque art, and so with that, I hope we have all a pretty good understanding of what chiaroscuro and what tenebrism means. And because of that, we definitely have been seeing images and artwork that are very dependent on value contrast and on extreme value contrast to make them exciting, dramatic, and help the composition work. So the question that we start with is, how do we create value and value contrast in a work? And there are a number of different ways. The first way we're going to talk about is line weight, the change of weight in a line, right? Whether the thickness of a line or the value of the line. Mark repetition, like in let's say a drawing or a print, where there's hatching or cross-hatching or other kind of build-up of marks. And pure tone and gradation, which we can see also in types of printmaking or drawing, but especially in photography, or distinct values, like just in a painting where we might paint one shape black and another shape gray, and that is also includes distinct values, would also include distinct colors. So color contrast can also create value contrast because colors are not the same value, right? This color here is a mid value, and this color here is a light mid, right? Like not as light as the white of the page by any means, but still much lighter than the other. Okay, so here are two works. Both drawings, both using ink. One was purely brush and ink. Another one probably was mostly brush and ink, but also some pen work. And we have the Rico Lebrun that we've seen a number of times in the class. Remember, it was on the test. And then we have this John Byrne, which I think we've seen only once in the class. But they both are works that are using change of line weight to create value contrast, create the illusion that there is light shining on the form, that there are light, especially you can really kind of see it very explicitly and clear in the John Byrne drawing here. Here we have two works of art that are using the buildup of mark making, and in this case hatching and cross-hatching, as well as a conscious awareness of cross-contour line to create tone, right? To create value. In the drawing, you can really see the marks quite clearly, so it feels less like tone, but it still does create a sense of value. Whereas in this, I think it's an etching. It's anyway, this intaglio print by Durer. You can see that the working of cross-contour lines and hatching and cross-hatching is so fine, so tiny that from this point of view, unless I start blowing it up, it really does just look like tone. It's really hard to see that all of this tone is actually made up of repetition of lines. You can see it in places, but mostly it reads as just pure tone. But it's not pure tone. It's lots and lots of lines, hatching and cross-hatching, and lots of cross-contour. In fact, all of these, even this work here, which looks like it's pure tone, is made up of lots of little tiny just kind of dot marks, right? All of these are the illusion of tone through dots. And even in a photograph, the way photographic prints work, it is still just made up of dots. So here we have a contrast between a work of art that's making value contrast through tone, and like I said, of course, the tone in the printing process itself is still a mark-making system, right? And then another other works where it's creating just through the difference of what one color is, right, through a distinct choice, right? This is, you know, this near black color. This is this near white color. This is the color of canvas. And those three colors make all the value distinctions in this work. Whereas in the Ellsworth-Kelly, it's different colors, right? And notice that each of these are a different color. Those of you who are watching this video after having seen my lecture in class, remember what I said about how the projector kind of flipped it and made the red significantly darker. So that's some of the main ways that a work of art can create value contrast. Let's talk a little bit about the types of value contrast. There's two, or not the types, two parts to value contrast. The two main parts to value contrast are the value range and then the speed of contrast. The range is pretty easy to understand. It's just the difference, the amount of difference between the lightest light and the darkest dark in a work, right? Sometimes we are confused because we don't realize that we look at a painting, we think it has a really wide range, but we have to have someone actually show us that, well, you know, the lightest light isn't pure white and the darkest dark isn't pure black. But then the other part to that is the speed of contrast, which is the sense of how quickly the light shifts from the light area to the dark area. Here's a contrast between two photographic works that give you a pretty good example of those two differences. The work on the right, they're both by Weston, by the way. The work on the right has a much wider range. The darkest value, and that's partially just because of the printing process, the darkest value in this image and the lightest values in this image are both wider range than the darks to the lights in this image, right? The lights, because it's on a tone paper, are not all that light, and the darks are also not nearly as dark as these darks. So this image has a wider range. But if you also look at it, the shifting from the light areas to the darker areas is quite slow and gradual, shifting through lots of mid-values, mostly a lot of light mid-values, and then just slightly darker mid-values and slightly darker mid-values. It's a very, very slow shift. Whereas the speed of gradation in this pepper photo is much faster. The sense of how strong and direct the light is much stronger. So the impression of this photograph is of a much wider value range, or at least a much greater value contrast, right? But the range is actually wider in this piece. So a fast speed of gradation and a wide value range. Those are the two parts of value contrast. Okay, we'll talk about the rest about value in part 2.